Hey friends, welcome back to Poketto Booksy. Today, we're diving into 1984 by George Orwell. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if the government had the power to watch every single move you make, every single thought you think, 24 hours a day? What if you couldn't even remember what happened yesterday, because the truth itself kept changing right before your eyes? And what if falling in love, craving freedom, or simply speaking the truth became the most dangerous crimes you could commit? This isn't just some wild imagination. It's the terrifying reality George Orwell paints in this book. 1984 isn't just a novel, it's a warning, a chilling reminder about the future, a warning that feels even more real in today's world. So come with me on this journey as we explore the story of Winston Smith, a man trapped in a world where Big Brother is always watching. Chapter 1. A World Without Truth, the Web of Surveillance. This is the story of a world where every wall carries the same message: Big Brother is watching you. The year is 1984. The place, a country called Oceania, locked in an endless war with one enemy after another. Our main character, Winston Smith, is just an ordinary citizen of this world. He works at the Ministry of Truth, a name that sounds noble, but in reality, its job is the exact opposite. Every day, history is rewritten, facts are twisted, lies become truth, and truth becomes lies. Winston's world is gray, lifeless, colorless. There's no joy, no hope. Every home, every street, every office is filled with telescreens. And these telescreens aren't regular TVs. They're spies, recording your every move, every whisper, even the slightest change in your expression, 24 hours a day. Whether you're asleep or awake, happy or sad, the party is always watching. And the scariest part? You don't even own your own thoughts anymore. If you even think against the party's ideology, that's considered a thought crime. And the punishment? Worse than death. Imagine living a life where you're never truly alone, where privacy doesn't exist, where you can't even trust your own family, because here, children are trained to spy on their parents, to report them to the thought police if they ever dare to go against the party. The Thought Police, a terrifying agency. They don't just arrest you, they erase you. Anyone taken by them disappears forever. Your name, your existence, every trace of you is wiped clean from history, as if you never even lived. And it's under this constant shadow of fear that Winston survives. On the outside, his face shows calm, an artificial mask of peace. But inside, he's filled with rage. Rage at the system, at the party, and at the endless terror of Big Brother. He tries to hold on to faint memories of a world that once existed, a time when people were free to love, to laugh, and to speak the truth. But Winston can't really remember. Did that world ever exist? Or is it just his imagination? Because according to the party has always been right. And always will be. This entire society runs on 3 slogans, plastered everywhere. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. The more backwards these slogans sound, the deeper the party has drilled them into people's minds. The party's logic is simple. As long as the nation is at war, people live in fear. And when they're afraid, they don't ask questions. That's why to the party, war means peace. When individuals surrender their freedom to the party and work like slaves, they become part of the system, and only then they're safe. That's why freedom is slavery. And when people stop seeking the truth, when they blindly accept whatever the party tells them, the party grows stronger. That's why ignorance is strength. This upside-down way of thinking has hollowed society from the inside. And Winston feels that emptiness every day. He knows that 2 plus 2 equals 4. But the party claims that, if necessary, they can make 2 plus 2 equal 5 and force everyone to believe it. And everyone has to believe it. Crushed by this suffocating life, one day Winston makes a move that could very well sign his death warrant. He slips into one of the city's rundown neighborhoods and buys an old notebook and a pen from a tiny shop. It may seem small, but in his world, this is a serious crime. Because owning a diary means writing down your own thoughts, and having thoughts of your own is the greatest crime of all. Back home, hiding from the telescreen's gaze, Winston crouches in a corner. His hands tremble as he opens the diary and begins to write. Who is he writing for? He doesn't know. Maybe for the future, maybe for the past, maybe for a world where people are free. All he knows is he can't keep the truth locked inside any longer. And then, with shaking hands, he writes 3 words. Down with Big Brother. In this world, writing those words is practically suicide. Winston knows it's only a matter of time before he's caught. If not today, then tomorrow. But for the first time, he doesn't care. At least for one moment, he felt free. At least once, he put the voice of his soul down on paper. But the question remains, will this tiny spark of rebellion ever grow into a fire? Is Winston the only one who dares to think this way? Or are there others, hidden in the crowd, silently choking on their hatred for the party? For Winston, that diary isn't just paper and ink. It's a symbol of private thought. The one thing the party hasn't fully taken control of. But the party's eyes are everywhere, and somehow it even knows how to peer into the human mind. This small act of defiance has set Winston on a path with no way back. And one question keeps haunting him. If truth can be rewritten, if memories can be erased, then what is reality? Every day, Winston is forced to confront that question at his job in the Ministry of Truth, the very place where he himself helps erase reality. Chapter 2. The Truth That Changes Every Day. The Murder of History. Winston Smith's job was strange. He worked at the Ministry of Truth, but his job wasn't to protect the truth. It was to change it. Imagine this. One day, the newspaper prints a story about a promise the government made. But 2 days later, the government denies ever making that promise. Winston's job was to dig up the old newspaper and rewrite the story, so the record showed the government never made that promise at all. And it wasn't just newspapers. Books, photographs, films, everything could be changed. If today the party declared, "We're at war with Eurasia and Eastasia is our ally," then every history book would suddenly reflect that version of reality. But if tomorrow the party flipped the story, saying, "We're fighting Eastasia and Eurasia has always been our friend," then overnight, workers like Winston would rewrite every single record to match the new truth. And the next morning, when people woke up, they'd be told, "We've always been at war with Eastasia." And the most terrifying part, people actually believed it. Their memories had become so fragile that they couldn't even recall what had been true the day before. This process was called reality control, the party's complete power over what was real. Whatever the party said became the truth. If the party claimed that 2 plus 2 equals 5, you weren't just expected to agree, you were expected to truly believe it. To make this work even easier, the party was creating a new language called Newspeak. The purpose of Newspeak was simple: reduce the number of words. Words that could inspire rebellion, freedom, or criticism were being deleted from the language itself. Think about it. If the word freedom didn't exist, how would you even think about freedom? If you had no words to express your feelings, wouldn't those feelings slowly die inside you? That was the true goal of newspeak, to make thought crime completely impossible by eliminating the very words that could form those thoughts. Winston hated his job, but he did it with complete focus, because if he made even the smallest mistake or showed the slightest hesitation, he risked becoming an unperson. That meant vanishing, erased from history, wiped out as if you had never existed. And to survive in this constant swapping of lies and truths, people had to master a special skill called doublethink. Doublethink meant the ability to hold two completely opposite ideas in your mind and believe them both at the same time. For example, you knew the party was changing history, but at the same time, you also believed the party was always right. You knew you were lying, yet you convinced yourself to believe the lie with absolute sincerity. This mental gymnastics was something everyone had to master just to stay sane. Winston was good at it, but deep inside, part of him resisted. He wanted to know why. Why was the party doing all this? What was the real purpose behind the lies? Why was power such an addiction that truth and humanity had to be crushed beneath it? These questions gnawed at him day and night, and he knew. Searching for their answers was the same as inviting death, but Winston couldn't stop himself. One afternoon, while eating lunch in the cafeteria, he noticed a young woman. Her name was Julia. She worked in the fiction department at the Ministry of Truth. She was young, attractive, and appeared to be a loyal party member. She always joined in party activities, and she was even part of the Anti-Sex League, an organization created to stamp out love and desire. Because the party believed that private loyalties, like love and family, only weakened loyalty to the party, so those bonds had to be destroyed. Winston both feared and hated Julia. He suspected she might be watching him, maybe even working as a spy for the thought police. To him, she seemed like a hardcore party loyalist who could see right through his thoughts and turn him in at any moment. And yet, there was something about her, a strange pull he couldn't explain. He dreamed about her, sometimes with anger, sometimes with desire. And those feelings terrified him even more, because in this world, to feel deeply about anyone, love or hate, was dangerous. What Winston didn't know was that Julia wasn't at all what she seemed. In her eyes, too, there burned a spark of rebellion, a spark that was about to turn Winston's life into a storm. But when history itself is a lie, where does a man search for the truth? It's in that search that Winston would meet whatever he wanted and what he had. A solid romance tortured and followed by his name, Swan. But sure, it's the world of the moon. Or drag him into an even greater deception. Chapter 3. The First Spark of Rebellion. A Diary and a Dream. Winston's life moved in the same bleak rhythm, an endless cycle of fear, hatred, and loneliness. His diary was his only secret, the one window where he could let his soul breathe. But that window wasn't opening him to freedom. It was pulling him closer and closer to death. At work, two people terrified him the most. The first was the dark-haired girl, Julia, the one he suspected of being a spy. The second was O'Brien, a high-ranking member of the inner party. O'Brien was intelligent, commanding, powerful, and yet, every so often, Winston thought he caught a glimmer in O'Brien's eyes, a spark that made him believe O'Brien secretly felt the same way he did, that maybe O'Brien too despised the party, but was forced to play along. It was only a feeling, with no proof at all. but Winston clung to it. Somehow, he believed if there was anyone in the world who might truly understand him, it was O'Brien. And often, Winston dreamed of talking to him. He even dreamed of confessing to O'Brien about his diary. Then one day, as Winston was walking down the hallway at work, Julia suddenly stumbled and fell right in front of him. As he bent down to help her up, she quickly slipped a small piece of paper into his hand. Winston's heart began pounding. He was certain it had to be a message from the police, a signal that his time was up. His whole body shook with fear. For hours, he didn't dare unfold the note. He was convinced that the moment he opened it, it would be his death sentence staring back at him. Finally, with trembling hands, he opened the slip of paper. And on it were just 3 words: "I love you." Winston couldn't believe his eyes. How was this possible? The very woman he despised, the one he thought was his greatest threat, was declaring her love for him. Was this real? Or was it a trap? Was she trying to lure him into the party's hands? 1,000 questions exploded in his mind. And yet, buried beneath all those questions, a small spark of hope flickered inside him. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him on a personal level. Someone had expressed a feeling that had nothing to do with the party. After days of careful maneuvering and passing secret messages back and forth, Winston and Julia finally managed to meet in the crowded square of the city. That's when Julia revealed the truth. She wasn't at all the person she pretended to be. On the surface, she followed every rule, every slogan, every ritual. But on the inside, she broke them whenever she could, and she enjoyed it. She didn't care about party ideology. She didn't care about truth or lies. All she wanted was to live on her own terms, even if it meant stealing small moments of freedom in secret. For Winston, this was a shock. His rebellion was about ideals, about truth, justice, and history. Julia's rebellion was personal, physical, immediate. She wasn't fighting for some greater cause. She just wanted the party to leave her alone. Their reasons for resisting were worlds apart, but their enemy was the same. And that shared enemy pulled them closer than either of them had ever imagined. Every meeting, every conversation, every touch between them was dangerous. But that danger only made their bond even stronger. They began sneaking out to meet in secret, sometimes in a deserted forest, sometimes among the ruins of an old church. In those stolen moments, they tasted a freedom they had never known before. They laughed, they talked, they held each other, doing everything the party called a crime. For the first time in his life, Winston felt what it truly meant to be alive. His gray, flavorless existence was filling with color. And yet, he knew this happiness couldn't last. They were living inside a fragile bubble, and at any moment, it could burst. One day, Winston remembered the little shop where he had once bought his diary. The shopkeeper, Mr. Charrington, had always seemed like a kind, harmless old man, so Winston rented the small room above the shop. There were no telescreens there. That room became their secret world, a tiny island of freedom where they could breathe. They drank real coffee. They pretended to be an ordinary husband and wife. For a few brief hours, they lived as if the party didn't exist. Deep down, they knew they would eventually be caught, but they chose to ignore that truth, because those stolen moments felt worth more than the rest of their lives. Still, one haunting question lingered. When you're trapped in a cage, does an open door really lead to freedom, or just to another trap? Or maybe it was nothing more than another giant trap the hunters had set for them. Winston and Julia had already chosen the path of love and rebellion. But what they didn't realize was that every step forward was leading them closer to a dark cell where light could never reach. Chapter 4. Love as a Crime. The false sense of freedom. The little room above Mr. Charrington's shop became their heaven. Inside, there was only the soft ticking of an old clock, no noise from the outside world, no telescreen watching their every breath. That room was theirs, a private space where they could exist beyond the party's rules, beyond Big Brother's eyes, where for once they could belong only to each other. Julia would sneak things in from the black market. Real sugar, real coffee, fresh bread, even jam. Flavors Winston had almost forgotten existed. She would put on makeup, wear perfume. Simple acts the party had outlawed, because beauty, joy, and personal pleasure were crimes. But inside that room, those crimes became their quiet rebellion. They weren't just coming together physically, they were connecting soul to soul. Winston shared pieces of history the party had erased, and Julia told stories of the party's hypocrisy in the present. For them, love wasn't just a feeling, it was resistance. But for Winston and Julia, love was more than just love. It was a political act. The party demanded that every ounce of loyalty, every drop of passion, belong only to Big Brother. Love, desire, family, these were the party's greatest enemies. So every time Winston and Julia chose each other, they were striking directly at the party's rule. They were saying, "Our feelings are our own. Our bodies are our own. You cannot control that." It was a dangerous game, and they both knew it. Each meeting in that little room could be their last. But that very fear only deepened their bond. Instead of worrying about tomorrow, they clung to the fleeting freedom of each stolen moment. Winston believed as long as they could still feel human emotions, as long as they could still love, the party could never truly win. Yes, the party could cage their bodies, they could even kill them, but they could never crawl inside their minds. They could never erase the truth that 2 + 2 = 4. That belief became Winston's greatest strength and his greatest mistake. Because as time went on, his rebellion grew bolder. Personal defiance was no longer enough. He wanted something bigger, something organized, a real fight against the party. Winston couldn't shake the rumors he'd heard. Whispers about the Brotherhood, a secret organization led by Emmanuel Goldstein, the party's most hated enemy. Every single day, during the 2 minutes hate, Goldstein's face filled the screen, and the people were whipped into a frenzy, screaming and spitting their rage at him. To Winston, that only proved it. The Brotherhood had to be real, and he was determined to find it. He confided in Julia, but she wanted nothing to do with it. To her, the Brotherhood was just another trap, a story the party had invented to lure out the rebels and crush them. She didn't believe in organized resistance, but she believed in Winston, and for that reason alone, she stood by his side. Winston, meanwhile, had his eyes on O'Brien. Something in his gut told him O'Brien was part of the Brotherhood. And then one day, just as Winston had imagined, O'Brien approached him. Casually, under the pretense of discussing the new edition of the Newspeak Dictionary. But hidden in that simple conversation was an invitation. A private meeting at O'Brien's home. Winston could barely contain his excitement. At last, he thought. His search was over. Winston and Julia went together to O'Brien's home. It was nothing like the cramped apartments of the outer party. His place was lavish, just like you'd expect for a member of the inner party. Servants moved quietly through the halls, and luxuries that ordinary people couldn't even imagine were simply part of O'Brien's daily life. But the most shocking thing? O'Brien turned off his telescreen. Just like that. He explained that inner party members had that privilege. To Winston, it felt almost impossible, as if he had just stepped into another world. Then O'Brien spoke openly. No games, no riddles. He admitted that he was against the party, and that he was part of the Brotherhood. He began questioning Winston and Julia. Would they lie for the cause, cheat, steal, even kill innocent people if necessary? To each one, Winston and Julia said yes. Yes to everything, except one. They swore they would never betray each other. O'Brien accepted their loyalty, binding them with an oath of commitment, and then he promised something incredible. He would send them a copy of Goldstein's book, the legendary text that revealed the full truth about the party. When Winston and Julia walked out of O'Brien's apartment, their hearts raced. For the first time, they felt they weren't alone. They were part of something bigger, a war, a revolution, a chance to bring the party down. But was this new hope real, or had they just stepped straight into the perfect trap? That little rented room, their so-called paradise of freedom, was about to become the stage for the greatest betrayal of all. Chapter 5. Cope, or the Deception of Brotherhood. After meeting O'Brien, Winston felt like his life finally had purpose. He wasn't just another faceless worker anymore. He was a soldier in a hidden war. A few days later, he received what he had been waiting for. A copy of Goldstein's forbidden book. Its title was The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism. Clutching the book, Winston hurried back to the secret room he shared with Julia. This was it. This was where all his questions would finally be answered. Why did the party rule the way it did? How did it hold so much power? And, most important, how could it be defeated? Julia was there with him, but her heart wasn't in the book. She cared less about ideology and more about being with Winston. Still, she stayed close as he opened the pages. The moment Winston began to read, his eyes were opened in ways he could never have imagined. The book laid everything bare. It explained that the world was divided into 3 massive superstates: Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. On the surface, they appeared different, but in truth, they were exactly the same. Where ideologies were identical, their conflicts, their wars, were nothing but elaborate illusions. But the book revealed an even darker truth. The superstates weren't truly enemies at all. They worked together not to defeat one another, but to keep their own people under control. It explained that the real purpose of war wasn't to win. It was to never end. When a nation is always at war, all its wealth and resources are funneled into weapons, leaving ordinary citizens poor, hungry, and broken. A population that is starving and afraid never asks questions. They cling to their rulers, believing only they can provide safety. And that's why the party's slogan rang true. War is peace. Because endless war kept society exactly the way the party wanted it. The book also laid out the party's structure. At the very top was Big Brother, who might not even exist, a symbol more than a man. Beneath him was the inner party, a tiny handful of elites who held the real power. Below them stood the outer party, workers like Winston, whose duty was to serve without question. And at the very bottom, the proles, the working class. They made up nearly 85% of the population. But the party ignored them. To the party, the proles were animals, too ignorant, too distracted to ever rise in rebellion. The true threat, the only ones who could think, were members of the outer party. People like Winston. That's why every watchful eye, every ounce of control was focused on them. As Winston read deeper, the fog lifted. For the first time in his life, he could see the party's machinery for what it really was. Now Winston finally understood. He saw why history was constantly rewritten, why newspeak was being forced on everyone, and what doublethink truly meant. At last, he had answers to the question of why, but the book gave him no clue about how. It never revealed how the Brotherhood actually worked, or how the party could ever be defeated. Eventually, Winston and Julia drifted off to sleep, the book still beside them. In that tiny room, they felt safe, like they had carved out a world of their own. They believed they now held the party's secrets. They believed that knowledge was power. And so they slept peacefully, completely unaware that every word, every movement was being watched and recorded, even there. When morning came, a harsh, metallic voice shattered the silence. It echoed from behind the picture on the wall. "You are dead." The blood drained from Winston and Julia's faces. The painting had been hiding a telescreen all along. It had been watching them, listening to them, waiting for this moment. Suddenly, the door crashed open. Black uniformed guards stormed in. They beat Winston and Julia without mercy, tearing apart the room, destroying everything. Their false paradise was gone in an instant. The clock, the coral paperweight, everything that tied Winston to the past was smashed in an instant. The fragile symbol he had cherished was gone, and then came the cruelest blow. Mr. Charrington, the kindly old shopkeeper Winston had trusted, steered into the light with cold, merciless eyes. He was no gentle antique dealer. He was thought police. All along. The room, the shop, O'Brien's promise, the Brotherhood, even Goldstein's book. It had all been a trap. A carefully built snare to catch rebels like Winston and Julia. Dragged apart, thrown into separate vans, Winston caught one last glimpse of Julia's face, twisted in pain, broken by betrayal. He knew then the game was over. They were taking him to the one place no one ever returned from. The place where there was no light. The place where love itself was twisted into terror. The ministry of love. And waiting for him there was O'Brien, the very man Winston had trusted most. Now the question wasn't whether Winston would survive. The question was, would his humanity survive? Chapter 6, where humanity itself dies. The ministry of love, a name that sounded beautiful, but inside it was pure horror. No windows, no shadows, only blinding white light that never turned off. A light that erased all sense of day and night, breaking the mind as much as the body. Winston was thrown into a cell. Days without food, days without water. His body starved, his spirit shredded. In terms of the day we landed, Winston was drawn with solid spirits. Winston was dead, and one with a sound of hate that passed away. The other prisoners came and went. Some were loyal party men, some were rebels like him. But pain and fear erased all differences. Here there was no friendship, no sympathy, only the silence of people waiting for their punishment. And then, Room 101. The name alone froze the heart. No one knew what was inside, but everyone knew it was the worst place in the world. Prisoners trembled at the sound of it, their eyes wide with terror when their names were called. After endless days, Winston's turn came. He was dragged into a torture chamber, and there his heart nearly stopped. His tormentor, his interrogator, the man holding his fate in his hands, was O'Brien. O'Brien smiled at Winston. "You knew it all along, Winston. Deep down, you always knew." And in that moment, Winston understood. O'Brien had never been his friend. From the very beginning, it was all a trap. O'Brien revealed the truth. Even Goldstein's book, the so-called Manifesto of Rebellion, had been written by the party itself. Every page, every word, all of it, staged. Then the torture began. Winston was strapped to a machine. Electric shocks tore through his body. The questions came, one after another, and every time Winston's answer didn't match the party's doctrine, O'Brien turned up the pain. "How much is 2 plus 2? O'Brien asked. "4, Winston whispered. The dial turned. Agony surged, again and again, until Winston's mind broke, until he was forced to say that 2 plus 2 was 5, or 3, or whatever the party wanted. But O'Brien's goal wasn't just to make Winston submit. It wasn't enough for him to scream in pain and obey. No, O'Brien wanted something deeper. He wanted to fix Winston, to rewire his very mind. And so he explained why the party sought power, why it would never be satisfied with obedience. O'Brien leaned closer and said, "The party doesn't seek power to help people. It doesn't care about justice. It doesn't care about prosperity. The party wants power for the sake of power itself. The thrill, the ecstasy, the intoxication comes from absolute control over another human being." Then he painted a picture of the future. "Do you know what it looks like? Imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever." O'Brien explained why rebels weren't simply executed. If we killed them right away, they'd die as martyrs. Their deaths might inspire others. No, we destroy them differently. First, we break their spirit. We erase their thoughts. We hollow them out from the inside. And then, we send them back into society as living proof of the party's victory. Winston's mind was being emptied, piece by piece, and filled with the party's ideology. O'Brien didn't just want Winston to obey. He wanted him to believe, to truly believe, that the party was the only truth, that Big Brother was God. Weeks of relentless torture passed. Winston's body was broken, his mind shattered. He confessed to everything. Crimes he had never committed, sins he had never even thought of. And at last, he felt it. He thought he was cured. He thought he had learned to love the party. But then, one night, as he slept, in his sleep, Winston whispered Julia's name. O'Brien found out, and in that moment, he knew there was still a corner of Winston's heart the party didn't control. A tiny spark of rebellion still burned. He still loved Julia. That love had to be destroyed. It was his final act of defiance. So O'Brien decided it was time. Time to take Winston to room 101. He told him, in room 101. For Winston, it was rats. He had always been terrified of them. Inside room 101, O'Brien brought in a cage. Inside the cage, 2 massive starving rats. The front of the cage was designed to lock onto Winston's face, so the rats could tear directly into him. As the cage was brought closer, all of Winston's defenses shattered. The last thread of his humanity snapped. He screamed in terror. "Do it to Julia, not me! Julia! Tear her face apart, rip her to the bone, but not me." And in that moment, O'Brien knew he had won. Winston had betrayed the one person he loved most. His final loyalty was gone. There was nothing left inside him that he could call his own. Because when the soul dies, nothing remains. After selling his soul in room 101, Winston was released from the Ministry of Love. He wasn't executed. Instead, he was turned into a hollow shell, a living corpse. His body was broken. His mind was empty. His emotions were gone.
The party didn't need to kill him because he was no longer a threat.
Now Winston spent his days sitting in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, drinking gin, watching the telescreen, listening carefully to party announcements. One day, he ran into Julia, but she too had changed. The sparkle in her eyes was gone. Her body was heavy, drained, lifeless. They talked for a while. Both admitted they had betrayed each other. They confessed that when faced with real fear, all you think about is saving yourself. But none of it mattered anymore. The love they once shared was completely dead. They felt nothing when they looked at each other. No emotion, no love, no pain. They were strangers now. And in the final scene, Winston sat alone in the cafe. The telescreen announced that Oceania had won a massive victory in the war. Tears filled Winston's eyes, but these weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of joy. For the first time, he felt a strange love for Big Brother, a deep sense of pride. He realized he was finally cured. The struggle was over. He had won the victory over himself, because now he truly loved Big Brother. And that's where the story ends. The party had won. Not only had they crushed a rebel, they had conquered his soul. Winston's story shows us that tyranny doesn't just strip away our freedom of speech or action. It takes something far more dangerous: our ability to think, to feel, and even to love. So, friends, what can we take away from this audiobook? George Orwell's vision carries warnings that are more relevant today than ever in our digital age. The first warning is about surveillance. Today, we're surrounded by cameras, social media, and our own phones, all collecting information about us every second. This book reminds us just how precious our right to privacy really is. The second warning is about controlling the truth. In an age of fake news and non-stop propaganda, the line between fact and fiction is getting blurrier every day. Orwell's message is clear. We must always fact-check, question what we're told, and never forget history. Because the moment we forget our past, we're doomed to repeat it. And the third, maybe the most important, warning is about freedom of thought. This book shows us that the real battle happens inside our own minds. As long as we hold on to the ability to think freely, to ask hard questions, and to doubt those in power, no dictatorship can ever truly own us. Yes, Winston lost his battle, but his story inspires us to keep fighting ours. Thank you so much for listening to this audiobook summary. I hope Orwell's 1984 made you stop and think. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Poketto Booksy for more eye-opening book summaries in the future. Because books don't just tell us stories, they teach us how to live. Thank you.